Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back, you guys at Magic. This is Hunter and David. Say what up, David.
Yo, what's going on?
We are coming at you with an upgrade video. This time, David is going to be taking us through his upgrade of the Legends Legacy Precon Commander deck from Dominaria United. David, start us off by talking a little bit about the deck. Tell me what you did.
So this deck just straight out of the box originally has Dihada, Bender of Wills, which is a Planeswalker at the helm. I'm actually not necessarily super high on this card, so we're going to talk a little bit about it here in a moment, but I am going to replace the commander of this deck. So I'm going to replace the face of it with a backup commander. Just straight out of the box, though, this deck is just kind of filled with legendary creatures, and that's kind of just the theme. Aside from that, they kind of do different things. It seems to be like there's a legendary theme, there's a pseudo equipment theme, there's a pseudo reanimation theme. There's a lot going on in this deck, and although it's not the worst precon I've ever seen, it feels a little bit jumbled at times. So the end goal here is we're going to try to streamline it and kind of point it in a direction.
All right, yeah, I know they created a whole bunch of new legendary creatures for this deck specifically. I'm excited to see what you did with
And I hope I didn't remove too many of them.
it. All right, David, you said you were going to do the backup commander. Tell me what this commander is.
So our backup commander, which is actually just going to become the new commander of this deck, is Shanid, Sleeper Scourge. It's one, a red, a white, and a black for a legendary creature human knight. It's a 2/4 with menace. It says other legendary creatures you control have menace. It also says whenever you play a legendary land or cast a legendary spell, you draw a card and lose 1 life. Essentially, what we're trying to do here is get our commander out as early as we possibly can and take advantage of that draw engine to just make sure that we're constantly being able to deploy threats.
All right, I like that. So, start us off. What are we adding into the deck?
Well, the first card that we're going to include in here, one of the creatures that I saw immediately was just like, oh man, this has such good synergy in this legendary creatures matters deck, is actually not a legendary creature, but it's got a ton of synergy with every other card in our deck. And that is Labyrinth Raptor. This is a black and a red for a creature Nightmare Dinosaur. It's a 2/2 with Menace, and it says whenever a creature you control with Menace becomes blocked, defending player sacrifices a creature blocking it. You can also pay a black and a red, and it says creatures you control with Menace get +1/+0 until end of turn. With our commander in play, every other legendary creature in the deck also has Menace.
Yeah, see, the synergy is so real with this card.
Yeah, so essentially, if they want to be able to block one of our creatures, they kind of have to throw a ton in front of it. They're going to be sacrificing something. We got that Menace Clause already, so beautiful synergies there. We're also going to include a couple cards in here that are just going to be kind of good stuff. I just kind of tried to find a couple cards that fill the role of just good legendary creatures in this deck. The first one here is God Eternal Oketra. This is 3 and 2 white. It's a legendary creature zombie god. She's a 3/6 with double strike, and she says whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 4/4 black zombie warrior creature token with vigilance. Whenever she dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put her into the owner's library third from the top. So she's kind of got a little bit of a pseudo recursion clause on her own. She's got a wonderful body, and she's going to help us out whenever we're casting into our creatures, which is exactly what our deck wants to do by making tokens that are pretty beefy. Thalia Heretic Cathar is going to be included in here as well. She is 2 and a white for a legendary creature human soldier, a 3/2 with first strike, and says creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. That actually works incredibly well with our creatures having menace, because that means that they're not going to be able to block immediately. And if their creatures are entering the battlefield tapped, it's going to buy us extra turns where we could just be able to push through combat damage before our opponents are going to be able to gum up the board.
Yeah, these two cards sound pretty mean.
Speaking about mean, we're going to add in some cards that are going to help us hit our opponents because, well, we like to turn our creatures sideways in this deck. The first one here is Aurelia the War Leader. She is 2 red and 2 white for a legendary creature angel. She's a 3/4, has flying, vigilance, and haste. It says whenever she attacks for the first time each turn, untap all creatures you control. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. Nothing better than swinging twice. Karlak Fury of Avernus is 4 and a red, a legendary creature, Tiefling Barbarian. She's a 5/4 and says that whenever you attack, if it's the first combat phase of the turn, untap all attacking creatures. They gain first strike until end of turn, and after this phase, there is an additional combat phase. So both of these cards work pretty similarly here. Lastly, we're going to include Godo Bandit Warlord. This is 5 and a red for a legendary creature human barbarian. It's a 3/3. It says whenever Godo Bandit Warlord enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an equipment card and put it onto the battlefield. If you do, shuffle your library. It also says whenever it attacks for the first time each turn, you untap it and all samurai you control. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. Now, we're going to get to the equipment that you're going to go grab here in just a moment, and sadly, there are no other samurai in this deck, but Goto makes his impact in this deck in a very, very real way.
Yeah, all these cards, legendary creatures that just want to do multiple combats. That is insane, especially with Menace.
We like to hit.
So we like to hit a lot, but what else are we going to do with the deck?
So, one of the downsides of our commander drawing us a bunch of cards is that he's also going to be losing us life. He's going to be hitting us one time for every card that we're going to be able to just kind of cantrip off of our legendary creatures and our legendary spells. So, what I want to do here is include a couple of cards that are going to pad our life total a little bit. The first one here is Cardur Doom Scourge. He is 2, a black, and a red for a legendary creature, Demon Berserker. It's a 4/3, and it says that whenever it enters the battlefield, until your next turn, creatures your opponent's control attack each combat if able, and attack a player other than you if able. That first part there alone is going to be able to make sure that we can swing in and have our opponents just be completely defenseless. The second part of the card says whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. That's fantastic for us because it's not just one of our creatures, it's whenever any of our opponent's creatures or just any creature on the battlefield dies. Combo Council of Allocation is 1, a white, and a black for a legendary creature human advisor. It's a 2/3, and it says whenever your opponents cast a non creature spell, that player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So, a nice little drain effect. And I'm going to completely butcher this last card's name, so I do apologize. But this one is brand new, straight out of Dominaria United, and a card that I am very high on. This is Ellis Ilkor Sadistic Pilgrim. For a white and a black, you get a legendary creature, Phyrexian Core Cleric. It's a 2/2 with Death Touch, and it says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. Whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. So he pads our life total by essentially negating the damage that our commander would be dealing to us from casting these legendary creatures. In addition to that, he also potentially turns a board wipe against our opponents by threatening to drain their life.
Yeah, all these cards are really good. And the synergy of being legendary, also incredible.
So, in addition to our commander just going to be able to draw some cards, I want to make sure that we have a couple other outlets in our deck to be able to draw cards or just be able to tutor for some things. The first one here is Varagoth Bloodsky Sire, and I'm quickly learning that I love this card. He is 2 and a black for a legendary creature, Demon Rogue. He's a 2/3 with Death Touch and an ability called Boast. For Boast, you can pay 1 and a black. It says target player searches their library for a card, then shuffles their library and puts that card on the top of it. Heads up, you're only ever going to target yourself. Activate this ability only if this creature attacked this turn and only once each turn. Having a 3-drop, even though he's a little bit small, he's got Death Touch, and with our commander in play, he'll also have Menace, so hopefully he'll be able to swing in without kind of having any real repercussions. Next up here, we have Queen Marchesa. She is 1, a red, a white, and a black for a legendary creature, Human Assassin. She's a 3/3 with Death Touch and Haste. Says whenever she enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent is the monarch, you put a 1/1 black assassin creature token with Death Touch and Haste onto the battlefield. That assassin is going to make sure that we continue to be the monarch later on.
Yeah, Queen Marchesa, one of the most popular commanders of all time. Getting to see her in a different deck is very cool.
Yeah, I really love the way that she plays in this one.
What are we doing with your removal package, Dave?
So one of the things that I don't understand at all is the fact that we are playing Mardu, which is probably the best color combination for creature removal in EDH. And the removal that was included in this deck actually kind of sucks. So we're going to try and beef that up a little bit. We're going to include both Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares. We're playing white. We've got to play the best creature removal spells in the format. Path to Exile is a single mana for an instant. It says exile target creature. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tap, then shuffle. Swords to Plowshares is also a single white mana for an instant. It says exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. In addition to that, we're also going to throw in Anguished Unmaking here. This is 1, a white, and a black for an instant. Exile target non-land permanent. You lose 3 life. That life loss, I promise, is negligible. This card is amazing.
All really, really solid removal spells. I see those played so often. What are we doing with your artifacts?
So, the first artifact that I want to talk about here is going to be that equipment I alluded to earlier on with Godo. We're going to be throwing Helm of the Host in this deck. This is a 4-mana legendary artifact equipment. It says at the beginning on your turn, create a token that's a copy of equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary if the equipped creature is legendary. That token gains haste, and it has an equip cost of 5. Helm of the Host is actually just a really solid equipment in this deck on its own. Being able to make a copy of a legendary creature and then being able to swing in with it since it has haste is going to be great. But if you happen to have Godo, whenever he enters the battlefield, he's going to search your library for Helm of the Host. You'll put it into play. If you can pay the extra 5 mana, you equip it to Godo. The way that this works is at the beginning of combat, Godo will actually make a copy of Godo because of Helm of the Host. That copy of Godo can then attack. He's going to gain you an additional combat, which will then trigger a Helm of the Host, which will then make a new Godo, giving you an additional combat, which will trigger Helm of the Host. And I think you see where I'm going with this. You actually make an
Unlimited Godos.
Yep, you make an unlimited amount of Godos that can just continue to attack and attack and attack and attack until all of your opponents are dead.
That sounds like a
So,
fun way to win.
oh, it's absolutely a fun way to win. It's a fantastic synergy piece here, and I do love how both cards are actually just really solid on their own. Our commander is going to be able to draw us cards whenever we cast a legendary spell, so that means Helm of the Host will also trigger our commander too. Now, one of the things that I did notice about this deck for some of the other artifacts is that the artifact ramp in this deck really sucked. In fact, there really wasn't much of it at all. Unlike the Painbow deck, though, at least we did get a Soul Ring. Two of the card, two of the cards that I did want to make sure that got thrown in here were the Talisman of Hierarchy and Talisman of Indulgence. Super important that we have access to these cheap talismans here. Talisman of Hierarchy is a 2-drop that we can tap to add either a colorless mana to our mana pool, or we can tap it for a white or a black, but if we do, it deals 1 damage to us. Talisman of Indulgence can also tap for that colorless, but we can tap it to add either a black or a red, and it'll deal 1 damage to us. Now, I promise that 1 damage isn't really a whole lot, and you probably don't need to tap these for that 1 damage more than maybe once or twice over the course of an entire game. But this can be a huge game maker for you and can really be the difference between whether or not you're an active participant or just sitting by and watching your opponents play a game of Magic.
Makes sense.
We are also going to include a single enchantment in this deck, but it's definitely a fun one. It is Authority of the Consuls. It's a single white mana. It says creatures your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you gain 1 life. Like I mentioned earlier with the Thalia, this is great having our opponent's stuff enter the battlefield tap because it opens the door for us to be able to get in for combat damage. And the added bonus of this card is that it also helps to negate some of the life loss we're going to be causing ourselves when we're drawing.
All right. Those are all very good cards, but I noticed that you may have added some lands. What do we got?
So this was a 3-color deck, and I noticed that we had a really weird number of lands that tapped for colorless mana in here, to the point where it almost felt like it was trying to push itself into, like, I don't want to say 4-color territory because obviously colorless isn't a color, but it was kind of going in that direction. What I did want to do, however, is feed into the synergy that our commander has, because whenever we play a legendary land, we still trigger our commander and draw, which is amazing for us because you don't have to pay any mana to play a land. So thank you, Kamigawa, because you loaded us up here with some amazing options. The first one that we're going to include in here is Takenuma Abandoned Mire. It's a legendary land that can tap for a black. You can also channel it by paying 3 and a black. It says you have to discard it, mill 3 cards, then return a creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. The ability does cost 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. The wonderful thing here is you hopefully should have several of them. And if you want to, you can play this as a land that doesn't come in tapped and just be able to draw off it. Sokenzan Crucible of Defiance is a legendary land that can tap for a red. Also with channel, for a 3 and a red, you can discard it. And if you do, you create 2 1/1 colorless spirit creature tokens. They gain haste until end of turn. And similarly, this ability also costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. We have Iganjo, Seat of the Empire, another legendary land. This one you can tap to add a white, or you can channel it for 2 and a white. Whenever you do, you'll discard it. It deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature, and it costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. Lastly, here we're going to also include Iganjo Castle, a legendary land that you can tap to add a white to your mana pool. You can also pay a white, tap it, and prevent the next 2 damage that would be dealt to target legendary creature this turn. So it might actually save, well, most creatures in your deck.
Yeah, these are all really fantastic with the flexibility of doing something else, but I know you really want to play them to trigger your commander.
Oh, absolutely. So they're wonderful for that flexibility. Also, really powerful with that card draw effect. And of course, no precon would be complete without adding one whole swamp.
No precon would be complete by adding one. I love it. All right, we talked about the additions. Now, the hard part. What are we taking out, Dave?
All right, so some of these were some pretty easy cuts. Some of these were a little bit more challenging. The first card that we're going to be removing here is actually the face card of the deck, which is Dihada, Bender of Wills. She is a red, a white, and a black for a legendary planeswalker. She starts with 5 loyalty. Her first ability is a +2 that says up to 1 target legendary creature gains vigilance, lifelink, and indestructible until your next turn. Her -3 says reveal the top 4 cards of your library, put any number of legendary cards from among them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Create a treasure token for each card put into the graveyard this way. Her ultimate, which is at -11, says gain control of all non-land permanents until end of turn. Untap them. They gain haste until end of turn. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. You're like, wait a second. Every single one of these abilities actually does synergize with the deck. But the reason why I got rid of her is she's actually not a creature. And I really wanted to include more creatures into this deck.
I suppose I'll give you a pass on that one. That makes sense.
Her abilities are obviously still relevant, and she can be your commander. I chose to end up cutting her here because, well, we had to make room for some of the goodies that I threw in, and I just felt like she could get the axe. Hero's Podium is 5 mana for a legendary artifact. It says each legendary creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other legendary creature you control. You can pay X and tap it. Look at the top X cards of your library. You may reveal a legendary creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Our commander should already be doing enough card draw for us, and I don't like having to pay 5 mana for an artifact. Even if it does trigger our commander, I feel like this is very expensive, and I just would rather be doing other things. Kaya's Wrath is another card that I just didn't want to include in this deck. For 2 white and 2 black, you get a sorcery. It says destroy all creatures, you gain life equal to the number of creatures you control that were destroyed this way. That life gain is going to be very negligible at best, and I really don't want to be pushing a panic button to be blowing up the board. Plus, we have other board wipes inside the deck already. So Kaya's Wrath, not really my favorite. It's also kind of difficult to cast with those 4 specific pips. Some of the next cards that we're going to remove here, I have 2 instant speed removal tricks that are just really not very impressive considering we have much better options in Mardu. The first one here is Bedevil. This is 2 black and a red for an instant. It says destroy target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. We just upgraded this one to Anguished Unmaking, which I feel is just better. Similarly, Hero's Downfall is 1 and 2 black for an instant that says destroy target creature or planeswalker. Although Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares can't hit a planeswalker, they can deal with a problem creature for you for much, much cheaper. Ambition's cost is 3 and a black for a sorcery. It says you draw 3 cards and you lose 3 life. Although I actually do like these kinds of cards, I do feel like Ambition's cost is a little bit on the more expensive and weaker end of these kinds of effects.
Yeah, those make sense to get the axe. I know we've upgraded those with the removal package. What else are we getting rid of?
So some of the other cards we're going to be getting rid of, 2 of the brand new equipment that were just added into this deck for the kind of pseudo equipment theme, which I'm not really here for. The first one here is the Reaver Cleaver. It is 2 and a red for a legendary artifact equipment. It says equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, create that many treasure tokens. It's got an equip cost of 3. I'm normally not the biggest fan of equipment that really don't do a whole lot, and this thing is 6 mana before it does anything. And even at that, it doesn't actually guarantee that we're going to be able to do anything at all. Our creature still has to be able to connect, meaning they still have to be able to swing in. Now, ideally, obviously, our creatures are going to be attacking pretty regularly. I just don't want to have to be dependent for them to be able to make that connection for this card to do quite literally anything. Tenza Godo's Maul is 3 mana for a legendary artifact equipment. It says equip creature gets +1/+1. As long as it's legendary, it gets an additional +2/+2. As long as it's red, it has trample. It's got an equip cost of 1. Same kind of thing here. I actually did have to make a couple cuts that we could bump up the creature count, and Tenza Godo's Maul got the axe for it. Next up here, one of the other things that I noticed about this deck is that although it didn't really have a whole lot of ramp, it kind of had some weird ones in here. Hedron Archive is 4 mana for an artifact that you can tap it to add 2 colorless mana. You can also pay 2 mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. Our commander is going to be doing the card draw for us, and I don't want ramp that I have to invest 4 mana into. This is just a little bit too expensive. I need our ramp to come down earlier. So the next 2 artifacts I'm going to talk about, I'm actually not necessarily super opposed to them, but I think that they have a special place that they fit into. But a 3-color deck is really just not going to be it. The first one that I'm going to talk about here is Hazarat's Monument. It is 3 mana for a legendary artifact. It says red creature spells we cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever we cast a creature spell, we may discard a card. If we do, draw a card. Hazarat's Monument is actually a totally fine card in a mono red deck or even a 2-color deck. The problem that I happen to have with this, however, is for 3 mana, this was one of the pseudo ramp pieces in the deck, and it's not really doing a whole lot for us because we're in 3 different colors. And not really all of our creatures are going to be jumping into Mardu. We have a lot of mono white or white black creatures, for example, in the deck that Hazarat's Monument just simply misses. Similarly, Oketra's Monument. This one is 3 mana for a legendary artifact. White creature spells we cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever we cast a creature spell, we create a 1/1 white warrior creature token with vigilance. This one not only not really helping us be able to ramp, but the creatures that it does produce for us, I don't really care about. So we did end up cutting both of these cards to make room for the talismans that I talked about earlier. The next card here that I did end up removing is a legendary artifact. It's the Circle of Loyalty, which is 4 and 2 white. It says this spell costs 1 less to cast for each knight you control. Creatures you control get +1/+1, and whenever you cast a legendary spell, create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. You can pay 3 and a white to tap it and create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. This actually does synergize with our commander, but still not super sold on it. And for a gigantic 6 mana, I'm just not here for it. I did remove one final artifact from the deck, and this is going to be Honor Worn Shaku. This is 3 mana for an artifact. You can tap it and add a colorless mana. You can also tap an untapped legendary permanent you control and untap Honor Worn Shaku. Same kind of thing here. It's 3 mana for our artifact ramp. It's a little bit still more on the expensive side, and with our creatures turning sideways to go and beat face, I'm not expecting many of them to be around to help me out with ramping with this card. I did remove one whole legendary creature card from this deck that I think it was included in the Precon because it was a legendary creature, and that's it. This is Josu Vets, the Lich Knight. He is 2 and 2 black for a legendary creature zombie knight. It's a 4/5. It's got menace. It also has this gigantic kicker cost of 5 and a black. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create 8 2/2 black zombie knight creature tokens with menace. That's right, on its own, it's 4 mana for a 4/5 with menace, and I am never going to be able to pay for that kicker cost.
Are you telling me that it's got menace when your commander gives menace too?
And it's a little redundant.
Yeah, not worth it.
Yeah, that kicker cost being an extra 6 mana there as well makes this a 10 drop to do anything. And if it does do its thing, it's not really all that impactful.
So tell me, is there anything you didn't like removing?
There are 2 cards that I had to remove from this deck that actually kind of like hurt my soul. And I felt like I had to remove them just to make room for some of the goodies that we put into the deck. And I really didn't want to take these cards out. The first one here is Thrill of Possibility. It is 1 and a red for an instant. It says, as an additional cost to cast the spell, discard a card. You may draw 2 cards. So I really do love Thrill of Possibility. This is a card that I will throw into the deck most of the time, but we did get rid of some of the recursion package by getting rid of our backup commander, I guess the Planeswalker. We're just not super in on that package to begin with either. And although it does a great job of fixing for us, I'm hoping that we can just kind of draw into threats. The second one here being Read the Bones, which probably hurt me to remove even more. This is 2 and a black for a sorcery. It says scry 2, then draw 2 cards. You lose 2 life. We do have other card draw options in the deck, though. I absolutely promise you that.
As someone that has played Magic with you for years, I know these are 2 really hard cuts for you.
These are almost in every deck I own.
I know that you added 5 lands. What are we removing to make up for it?
Well, some of the lands in this deck were poop. Just plain and simple. So we're going to go ahead and remove some of that. Boros Garrison, Rakdos Carnarium, and Orzhov Basilica, despite the fact that they all just got very pretty new reprints, are not good cards. They enter the battlefield tapped, return another land you control to your owner's hand, and they tap for 2 mana later on. Boros Garrison for a red white, Rakdos Carnarium for a black red, and Orzhov Basilica for a white black. I absolutely hate these cards, however, because they kind of trip you up the turn that you play them, and they make for awful cards in your starting 7. If you do happen to play this thing on turn 1, guess what? You actually have to bounce it back to your hand. If you play this thing on turn 2, not only do you get to bounce one of your lands back to your hand, you also get to discard a card, assuming you didn't have a 1-drop. I'm not a big fan of these. I like to remove these in just about every deck I can, assuming that the deck isn't graveyard focused.
Yeah, these the bounce lands are really tough.
And then lastly, I think somebody over at Wizards forgot this is a 3-color deck, and we probably don't want to be including a ton of colorless lands. So we're going to be cutting 4 of them. The first one here is Tyrite Sanctum. This is a land that you can tap for a colorless. You can pay 2 mana, tap it, and target legendary creature becomes a god in addition to its other types. Put a +1/+1 counter on it. You can also pay 4 mana, tap it, and sacrifice it. Put an indestructible counter on target god. That's a lot of mana to make one of our creatures a little bit more beefy.
It's a god.
It could be. Still dies to path. Gaia Reach Sanitarium is a legendary land, so I can see at least why they included this one in the deck. It can tap for a colorless, or you can pay 2 mana, tap it, and each player draws a card, then discards a card. I don't want to help my opponents filter out their hands. Mikakoro, Center of the Sea, is a legendary land as well. You can tap it to add a colorless mana to your mana pool. You can also pay 2 mana, tap it, and each player draws a card. I'm not here to help you. I'm here to beat you. The last card that we're going to remove from this deck is Mobilized District. This is a land that you can tap to add a colorless mana to your mana pool. You can also pay 4 whole mana. If you do, it becomes a 3/3 citizen creature with vigilance until end of turn. It's still a land, and this ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature and planeswalker you control. We need lands that tap for colors.
All right, Dave. So that is all your additions, all your removals. So tell me what your total was when it came to adding all of these cards into the deck.
So, assuming that you would go over to TCG Player at this very moment, the time of this recording, and load these all up for their market price, comes up to $95.84. So, we actually have a little bit of wiggle room.
That is great, dude. Have one of the many viewers of this video can go out and buy a card that maybe they thought could have been added.
Like another swamp.
Like another swap. Perfect. Before we wrap things up, do you have any last comments on the deck itself?
Generally, I think that the deck is actually quite a bit of fun. I definitely think that this deck, however, is one that if you are willing to kind of splurge a little bit and maybe invest more than $100 in, you can hit some really heavy hitters with those legendary creatures. Turns out some of the really more popular commanders also make for very good cards in this deck, so they kind of have a tendency to have a little bit more of a price tag. Definitely look forward to the $300 upgrade for this deck, though, because many of them will make the cut that time around.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to see David's full deck list in its entirety, check the description down below. We have a link right there for you on Moxfield. And while you're down there, hit that like button if you like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't subbed already because we are making so much more content. Don't want to miss out on it. And follow us on our Instagram and Twitter. That is at Guys That Magic, where we post a whole bunch of random other things. We will see you guys all in the next video. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace.
Bye.